The chandelier above the dining table glittered like frost in moonlight. Crystal flutes clinked together, laughter floated like smoke, and the air was rich with the scent of roses and old money. In the heart of Paris, inside the penthouse of the prestigious Madeleine Laurent, elegance bled into every corner like a curse dressed in silk. 10 guests sat around the long table, all impeccably dressed, all perfectly rehearsed. They had come to celebrate Madeleine's 50th birthday, a milestone she welcomed, not with sentiment, but with spectacle. Velvet gowns, custom-tailored tuxedos, and champagne bottles so rare their names sounded more like secrets than labels. At the far end of the table sat Élodie Laurent, Madeleine's only daughter. Her expression was unreadable, a marble mask among flickering candlelight. Her hands remained in her lap, clasped, unmoving. When someone cracked a joke, she smiled, but only with her mouth. Madeleine rose slowly, her jeweled dress catching every drop of light. She lifted her glass. "To time," she said. "That greedy little thief. May it steal only what we're willing to give." Soft laughter echoed. "To time," the guests echoed, lifting their glasses. Only Élodie hesitated. Narration would say she was overwhelmed, that beneath her cold exterior, she was holding back tears. That grief was hiding somewhere in her chest, waiting to bloom. But Élodie wasn't grieving. Not tonight. Madeleine's lips touched the glass, and the golden champagne kissed her throat. She smiled, the kind of smile that knew it still held power, the kind that once silenced rooms and seduced rivals. She looked at her daughter across the candlelit table. "You haven't said a word, darling." Élodie blinked, then stood, slow and deliberate. Her voice came like a soft violin note, controlled and haunting. "I'm just soaking it all in, maman." Madeleine raised an eyebrow. "Still so dramatic." Élodie stepped forward, picked up her own untouched glass, and held it out toward her mother. "To you," she said, "for surviving so much longer than anyone ever thought you would." The room laughed again. Nervous, hesitant, Madeleine narrowed her eyes for a moment, then clinked her glass to Élodie's with a sharp nod. They both drank. Then came dessert, small talk, a violinist playing on the balcony, and the Paris skyline watching from afar like a passive god. Madeleine basked in attention. Élodie sat quietly, folding into the velvet of her chair like a forgotten thought. And then, sometime after the final toast, between a chuckle and a story about Venice, Madeleine's fingers twitched. At first, no one noticed. She reached for her water but missed it. The glass toppled, her hand trembled, her smile faltered. Then came the sound, a sharp inhale, a half word, and then Madeleine Laurent collapsed. Her chair screeched across the marble as she fell sideways. Someone screamed. A man dropped his napkin. The violinist stopped, mid-note. Glass shattered. Within seconds, guests rushed to her side. Someone called for a doctor. Someone else shouted for cold water. Her eyes fluttered. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her skin, once glowing and defiant, turned the color of spoiled milk. Élodie did not move. She remained seated, fingers wrapped around the stem of her champagne glass, eyes locked on her mother's crumpled form. Someone bumped her shoulder rushing past. She didn't flinch. Her breathing was steady. From the hallway, the sound of frantic heels echoed. Staff scrambled, voices overlapping in panic. Someone cried, "She's not breathing!" Another shouted, "Turn her over!" Still, Élodie sat, quiet, watching. Her gaze didn't carry cruelty. It carried something colder, completion. One of the guests turned to her, wide-eyed and shaking. "Élodie, your mother—" "She's allergic to panic," Élodie said softly. The woman blinked. "What?" But Élodie said nothing more. She slowly stood, set the half-empty glass on the table, and walked toward the open balcony doors. Behind her, chaos bloomed like a storm. But the wind outside was calm. The Eiffel Tower blinked in the distance. Somewhere below, the hum of Paris continued as if nothing had changed. She touched the iron railing, closed her eyes, and listened to the night. Whispers filled the penthouse, guests whispering theories, staff whispering prayers, and yet, none of the whispers reached Elodie. Not tonight. She was already living in the next chapter. The one that began the moment Madeleine Laurent stopped breathing. They called it a heart attack. Doctors arrived too late. Paramedics tried everything. But by the time Madeleine Laurent was wheeled out of the penthouse wrapped in white linen, there was already a headline forming in someone's draft folder. Parisian fashion matriarch dies at 50. Elodie watched the news in silence the next morning. Alone in the same penthouse, sunlight streaming through tall windows, she let the words wash over her like static. Natural causes. Stress-induced arrhythmia. She died surrounded by love. None of them knew the truth. But then again, no one had known much about what really happened between mother and daughter. What had been said in the privacy of polished hallways, behind closed bedroom doors that smelled of lavender and old perfume. Only one conversation mattered now, one that happened 3 days before the toast. Madeleine had been sitting at her antique writing desk, reading glasses perched low on her nose, fingers gliding across the page of a legal document. "You should really stop wearing black," she said, without looking up. "It washes you out, makes you look tired." Elodie stood in the doorway, arms folded. "I'm not here to talk about fashion, maman." Madeleine sighed. Her signature filled the bottom line of the page with a swift flourish. She finally looked up. "Then what?" "I heard from Jacques. He said the notary called him. You're changing your will." Silence fell like a curtain. Madeleine removed her glasses. Her eyes were cool, unreadable. "Yes." Elodie stepped into the room, voice rising. "You're cutting me out?" "No," Madeleine said. "I'm making adjustments." "You're leaving everything to the foundation." "And why shouldn't I?" Madeleine replied, standing now. "You've made it clear you want nothing to do with this family, sleeping with someone I trusted, someone I—" She stopped herself. Elodie's mouth fell slightly open. "You knew?" "Of course I knew," Madeleine snapped. "You think Paris has secrets from me? You think you're the first girl to fall in love with a poor musician and throw your future away for him?" Elodie took a step back, wounded. He's not just anyone. He's not using me." "Oh, darling," Madeleine said with a bitter laugh. "You think I'm doing this out of cruelty. I'm doing it to save you from yourself." "You're doing it to punish me." Madeleine looked out the window then, toward the Seine. "You were never supposed to know," she whispered. That night Elodie packed a bag. She didn't leave, not physically, but something inside her did. A switch flipped. The ache in her chest turned to glass. What cut deepest wasn't the inheritance. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was the lie that had lived under their roof for years, that everything had been hers to inherit, that her mother's love had been unconditional. She wasn't angry, not yet. Anger implies fire, but what she felt was ice, a still, patient kind of cold, the kind that waits for the right moment to act, to hurt back, without leaving a bruise. Now, days later, the penthouse was silent. Sunlight fell in fractured patterns across the marble floor. Madeleine's perfume still lingered in the air, a sharp floral sting that caught in Elodie's throat. She stood alone in her mother's study, staring at the leather folder still resting on the desk. The revised will sat inside, sealed and complete. She didn't touch it, she didn't have to, because it was already done. Her name had been erased long before her mother took her last breath. And in that space where love had once lived, only Gabriel's name remained, echoing, tainted, dangerous. It started with music. It always did. Gabriel's fingers hovered over the strings of his violin like they were old wounds he could no longer touch without bleeding. The melody didn't come easily now, not since the night Madeleine Laurent died. The news had reached him like a whisper. She collapsed, gone before help arrived. Natural causes. And then the silence that followed. That told him something wasn't right. He hadn't spoken to either of them in weeks. Not since the confrontation. The last time he saw Elodie, her eyes had been full of fire, and her mother's had been full of something colder. Memory, maybe. Or regret. Gabriel Dupont had once been a rising star in the Paris conservatory circuit. Until talent stopped paying the bills. He played weddings, taught private lessons to bored heiresses, and occasionally performed at high-end galas when hired by someone who thought art could be bought for background noise. That was how he met Madeleine, Laurent. She had watched him perform at a fundraiser 2 years ago. Everyone else had drifted to the champagne table. She stayed, eyes locked on him, like she was watching something from her past resurrected. Afterward, she'd approached him, not with flirtation, but with calculation. "You don't belong in this corner," she said, brushing invisible dust from his collar. "How much to never play at a wedding again?" He laughed. "I'm serious," she said. "Come work for me. Private concerts, travel, the kind of exposure that makes people pay attention." And just like that, she'd lifted him from obscurity and placed him inside her gilded world. A benefactor, a mentor, an occasional lover. Something not quite defined. At first he was grateful. Then he was confused. Then he was caught. Because Elodie wasn't supposed to be part of the equation. He had met her one night by accident, wandering into the music room while she sat at the piano, half drunk and barefoot, playing chords with too much emotion and too little technique. "You're off tempo," he said gently. She didn't look up. "Then teach me." She didn't know who he was. Not yet. And for a moment, neither did he. She was just a girl with music in her fingertips and sadness in her eyes. And then, she became everything. They were careful at first. Secret glances, brief touches, stolen kisses behind velvet curtains. Gabriel told himself it was wrong. That Madeleine would never forgive them. That the whole house was built on silence, and breaking it would cause everything to collapse. But Elodie needed someone. She was angry, desperate to be seen, and Gabriel wanted to believe he could save her until Madeleine walked in on them. The memory burned clear in his mind. Her heels clicked like bullets across the marble floor. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply said, "Of all the women in Paris, you chose my daughter." Gabriel tried to speak, but she raised a hand. "I gave you a life, and you used it to ruin mine." And then, turning to Elodie, "You don't even know who he is, do you?" That's when Madeleine revealed what she had kept hidden, that she and Gabriel had been lovers. Quietly, discreetly, never public, but undeniable. Elodie's face crumpled. "Tell me she's lying." Gabriel said nothing. That silence broke, her more than any confession. Now, standing on a balcony overlooking the Seine, Gabriel could feel the ghosts of that night clinging to his skin. He had tried to call Elodie after Madeleine's death. No answer. He wrote once, then twice, then gave up. But something inside him still stirred with guilt and fear. He hadn't touched a violin in days. His hands trembled too much, and yet as the air cooled and Paris shimmered beneath him, he felt something shifting, not in the city, in her. Somewhere across town, Elodie sat in her mother's dressing room, combing through old perfume bottles and silk scarves, trying to rewrite memories that smelled like Chanel No. 5. She pulled open a drawer. A velvet pouch fell into her hand. Inside, a photograph. Gabriel, taken at the fundraiser, signed by Madeleine. On the back, one line in her mother's handwriting. "Not everything I love was meant to be kept." Elodie's hands shook. Whatever poison had been inside the champagne glass, there was worse inside her now, not hatred, not grief. Jealousy, not just of Gabriel's past, but of her mother's power to take everything and everyone she ever touched. It began the way frost spreads over a window, slow, silent, almost beautiful. 3 days after the confrontation, Elodie stopped crying, not because she'd healed, but because she no longer saw the point. Grief had been replaced by calculation. She had never been the screaming type. That wasn't how pain showed up in her bloodline. In the Laurent family, sorrow wore lipstick. It stood tall in black dresses and sent handwritten thank you cards to funeral guests. But Elodie wasn't sending any cards. She was studying poisons. She waited until nightfall, then turned off every light in the penthouse. She sat in the dark, phone glowing in her palm, reading articles that felt like science fiction. A cyanogenic glycoside, extracted from rare plants. Bitter almond scent. Detectable, but only if one knows what to smell. In small amounts, symptoms mimic cardiac arrest. She read clinical reports, medical trials, old criminal cases buried under legalese and dust, and then she found it. A case from Prague, a wealthy heiress poisoned during dinner. Toxin traced back to Eastern European herbalists, undetectable in low quantities, degraded quickly, virtually no forensic footprint. She copied the name of the compound onto a notepad, amygdalin, and beside it, a name, Le Givre Noir. A shadowy apothecary hidden in the outskirts of Paris, unregistered, known only to those who trafficked in extremes, pain, relief, illicit abortions, and whispered solutions. 2 nights later, she stood in front of the place, an iron door, half covered by ivy. No sign, no window, just a brass knocker shaped like a serpent devouring its tail. The man who answered was in his 60s, face marked by time and quiet crimes. He didn't ask her name. Dosage, he said. 1, she replied. He didn't blink. He turned and walked into the back, came out 5 minutes later with a small glass vial in a velvet pouch. Liquid form, he said. Tasteless, in sparkling alcohol. No more than 3 drops. After that, you risk complications. She held out cash. He didn't count it. When she turned to leave, he spoke again. Whoever it is, make sure they deserve it. She didn't answer, but the truth clung to her like perfume. She's already dead. I'm just finishing the echo. Back in the penthouse, she hid the vial behind a row of expensive serums in her mother's bathroom. If anyone came looking, they'd assume it was skincare. Elodie stared at her own reflection in the mirror. She didn't look like a killer. She looked like her mother. Same cheekbones, same pale mouth, same cold calculation behind the eyes. I forgive you, she whispered. But it wasn't true. It was a rehearsal. She practiced it every night. The line she would say during the toast. A performance, a prophecy. I forgive you. The champagne was selected days in advance. Dom Pérignon Rosé 2005, Madeleine's favourite, a bottle she'd been saving for a real milestone. On the morning of the party, Elodie uncorked it herself, poured a glass, stirred in the liquid, 3 drops exactly. It fizzed like nothing had happened, but something had. A daughter had. Made peace with her past, not by healing, but by choosing the final page of the story, and no one would ever read it. The bottle chilled in crystal silence. It sat at the center of the polished dining table, dew forming like breath on glass, as if even it knew what was coming. Guests trickled into the penthouse in soft murmurs and expensive shoes. A private birthday toast, not a party, Madeleine had insisted. Intimate, elegant, just those who matter. Elodie had worn black again. When her mother saw her, there was the usual flicker of disapproval, but no words. Only a small shake of the head and a forced smile. Elodie, she said, arms outstretched. Still mourning your youth, I see. I suppose some of us age differently, Elodie replied, without warmth. Madeleine's jaw tensed. She moved on, greeting her guests with air kisses and practiced laughter. Elodie stood by the window for a long time, watching the city smoulder in gold. The Eiffel Tower blinked in the distance. Dusk was always her favorite hour. It made everything feel suspended, like time forgot to move forward. When the toast began, everything slowed. Madeleine raised the bottle. Her fingers trembled slightly, an effect of age or anticipation. Or perhaps something deeper. Elodie watched her uncork it with a clean pop. The sound made her blink. As the champagne bubbled into each flute, Elodie felt her heart beating just a shade faster than normal. 3 drops. Stirred. No one would notice, but she did. Every sound became louder, every breath heavier. When Madeleine handed her a glass, their hands brushed. Skin against skin. History against vengeance. Madeleine smiled. You always did prefer bitter things. Elodie smiled back. And you always thought sweetness was real. The room laughed, unaware. She lifted her glass. Everyone did. And for a moment, just a moment, Elodie saw herself reflected in the surface of the champagne. Her face looked wrong. The glass curved her features, stretched them, made her smile look sharp, her eyes too dark. She didn't recognize herself. The toast happened around her. Words were spoken. Laughter rang out, but she didn't hear any of it. She was staring at the woman in the glass. Elodie, someone whispered beside her. Aren't you going to drink? She blinked. Lifted the flute, pressed it to her lips, let it hover there. Didn't drink. Couldn't. Not yet. Instead, she watched her mother. Madeleine lifted her glass proudly. Her red lips kissed the rim. She drank with elegance, effortless, cold, as always. And in that moment, Elodie felt something inside her rupture, not with guilt, but with clarity. It was done. She lowered her glass without tasting it. She walked back to the window and stared at the lights of Paris again. But this time, she didn't see beauty. She saw an ending dressed in celebration. And somewhere deep inside the reflection on the glass, the girl she used to be was already gone. The violinist played something soft and old, a lullaby dressed in silk. Guests wandered through the penthouse with champagne in hand, laughter spilling into high ceilings. Glass clinked against glass. Heels clicked against marble. It was the kind of evening Madeleine Laurent curated like a painting. Measured, elegant, distant. Elodie stood beside the grand piano, watching her mother glide through the room like a queen inspecting her court. Her movements were flawless, each gesture deliberate, each smile practiced. Madeleine was always aware of eyes. She didn't walk, she floated. She didn't laugh. She delivered sound like a polished weapon. Elodie used to admire it. Now she studied it like a countdown. By now, the poison would be working its way through her mother's bloodstream. It was slow, silent, designed not to kill instantly, but to mimic the betrayal of a weak heart. Exactly how Madeleine described her father's death. Fitting, Elodie thought. Madeleine leaned against the balcony doorframe, sipping the last of her champagne. Her voice was melodic as she recounted a story from Milan. Something about a broken heel, a smitten designer, and a ruined photo shoot that still made the cover of Vogue. People laughed, not because it was funny, but because she expected it. Then she blinked. Just once. A slow, deliberate blink. She set her glass down and wavered. It was subtle at first, like a flicker of light no one notices. She reached for the door handle, missed it. Her posture slackened, the edge of her confidence frayed. Her hand trembled slightly. Then the tremble turned into a shake. Someone said her name. Madeleine, her mouth opened, but no words came out. Only a small, breathy sound, like the last half of a sigh. And then she collapsed. The room stilled. Her glass hit the marble and shattered. A woman screamed. Someone rushed forward, dropping a handbag, heels slipping on polished stone. "Call an ambulance!" Elodie didn't move. She remained where she stood, her arms folded, watching her mother crumple like silk folding in on itself. Madeleine lay on her side, face against the cold floor, one earring pressing into her cheek. Her eyes were wide, her lips moved again. But still, no sound, only breath struggling to be something more. A guest knelt beside her. "Madeleine, Can you hear me? No response. Does anyone know CPR? I think I do, a younger man stammered, dropping to his knees, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. I can't find a pulse. Another voice cut through. Turn her over, someone else cried. She was fine just a moment ago. The violinist stopped playing. Elodie's gaze fell to the shattered champagne glass. The gold liquid was already beginning to dry into a thin stain beside her mother's body. She thought about the toast. To time, her mother had said. That greedy little thief, and now time had stolen her. Perfect. She stepped forward at last. Slowly, calmly. One of the guests looked up at her, panicked. Elodie, do something! Your mother! She's allergic to panic, Elodie said softly. The woman blinked, confused. What? But Elodie said nothing more. She walked to the fireplace, picked up a lighter, and lit one of the scented candles Madeleine used to mask the scent of anxiety. The flame flickered in her reflection on the silver tray. She stared at herself, unchanged. The paramedics arrived too late. Madeleine Laurent was pronounced dead at 10:14 p.m. The official report would list it as cardiac failure. There would be no autopsy, no suspicion. She'd had a history of palpitations after all. She'd even seen a cardiologist a month ago. How poetic, they said. How sudden. By midnight, the guests had left in silence, coats draped over shaking shoulders. Only Elodie remained. She sat at the edge of the dining table, the empty bottle before her. She ran her fingertip along the rim of the last unbroken flute, listening to the faint hum it made when touched just right. Somewhere deep in the walls, the violinist's last note still echoed like a goodbye. It rained, the morning of the funeral. Not heavily, just enough to make the city feel blurred. The courtyard of Saint-Sulpice was filled with black umbrellas and low murmurs. Everything was immaculate, expensive and cold, just as Madeleine would have wanted. The casket was white, imported, lined with pale velvet and surrounded by roses so perfect they looked unreal. Elodie stood motionless at the edge of it all, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. Her lips set in the kind of line that told people not to speak to her. She hadn't cried. Not when the coffin arrived. Not when they lowered it. Not when the priest called her a woman of strength and legacy. Grief had nothing to say to her. But guilt. Guilt whispered. She spotted him before he saw her. Gabriel. Hair longer now, face drawn, dressed in black but with no umbrella, soaked to the shoulders. He stood at the far end of the crowd, staring at the casket, like it might answer a question he was too afraid to ask aloud. Part of her wanted to look away. The other part waited for him to come closer. He didn't make her wait long. After the service, mourners dispersed like mist. Only Gabriel approached. Elodie didn't move when he stopped in front of her. The rain softened to a drizzle, sliding down her sunglasses. She's really gone, he said, voice low. Elodie didn't respond. He looked at her carefully. You don't seem surprised. People die, she replied. Even the ones who pretend they never will. Gabriel studied her. You think she deserved it? There was a pause. She tilted her head. Didn't she? His eyes searched hers. But there was something else there. A weight he hadn't dropped yet. I need to tell you something, he said. She sighed. Now? At her funeral? It's about the will. That stopped her. She turned her face to him fully. What about it? She told me, before everything fell apart, she wasn't going to cut you out permanently. It was meant to be temporary. Protection. Elodie's stomach coiled. She was afraid, Gabriel continued. Not angry. She thought people would come after her estate once they found out we were involved. She was stalling, waiting to fix it when the press calmed down. Elodie laughed once, sharp and hollow. Of course, she was always protecting her image, even in death. Gabriel stepped closer. No, she was protecting me. From you. Elodie's jaw tensed. What? She said you get lost. That when you love something, you break it, trying to keep it. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Gabriel's voice dropped to a whisper. She loved you, Elodie. She just didn't trust what you were becoming. The rain picked up again, soft and steady. Elodie turned from him and walked to the empty casket. It was closed now, resting beneath a canopy of flowers, untouched by the weather. She stared at it, trying to remember the last time she believed anything her mother said. Her chest felt hollow. She whispered so no one else could hear. You always said I was like you. Maybe you were right. 3 days after the funeral, Elodie was summoned. The message came in a pale envelope slid under her door. No return address. Just her name, handwritten in her mother's familiar script, Elodie, for your eyes only. ML. She stared at the writing for a long time before opening it. Inside was a card. Simple. Ivory. Embossed with a name she hadn't heard in years. Jean-Baptiste Valois. Notaire privé, she remembered him vaguely. An old man with shaking hands, who used to visit when she was small, always bringing Madeleine documents to sign and French chocolates Elodie wasn't allowed to eat. She assumed he was long dead. But when she arrived at the address, an office above a bakery in the Marais, he was still there, older now, nearly translucent, but alive, waiting. He offered no condolences, just a nod and a wordless gesture to the leather chair across from his desk. From a locked drawer, he pulled a slim black folder, set it before her like a relic. This was left in my care, he said. Instructed to deliver it only after the reading of the public will, Elodie's throat tightened. So there's more? There is always more with your mother. He opened the folder. Inside, a letter. No wax seal, just ink and intimacy. My darling Elodie, if you're reading this, I've already become the villain in your story. I won't ask for forgiveness. I know better than to believe I deserve it. But there's something you need to know. The will read at the funeral was not final. It was a performance, a shield, a delay. I wrote another, the real one. Jean-Baptiste has it. It names you as my sole heir. The foundation, the art, the penthouse, it's all yours. But with it comes the truth, and a choice. Elodie stopped, reading. Her fingers trembled. Her chest ached. The lawyer said nothing, just watched her quietly. She kept reading. There is one condition. In my safe is a locked box. The code is your birthday in reverse. Inside is the final document. Burn it, or sign it. Either way, everything is yours. There was no signature. Just the familiar scent of her mother's perfume pressed into the paper like a ghost. Back on the street, Elodie stood under a grey sky that threatened rain. In her coat pocket was the key to a future she thought she'd stolen, but had been gifted, deliberately, and in her heart, a question she couldn't outrun. If her mother had trusted her after all, then what had she just done? The safe was silent. It sat like a monument inside Madeleine's dressing room, buried behind silk gowns and boxes of untouched designer heels. The keypad blinked softly, waiting for a combination that had been carved into Elodie's memory since childhood. Her birthday. Reversed. She typed it in without breathing. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed too soft for what it guarded. Inside was a single silver box, smooth, heavy, fingerprints smudged along its surface like someone had gripped it too tightly once. Perhaps her mother, perhaps herself, in some other version of the future that never happened. She lifted it out, laid it on the vanity, and opened it. There were 2 things inside, a legal envelope and a photograph. She picked up the photo first. It was old, faded at the edges. A man, laughing, shirtless, holding a baby on his chest. Sunlight caught the baby's curls, her curls. Her father, smiling like the world had just begun. But it wasn't the photo that stopped her heart. It was what was written on the back in her mother's unmistakable script. "He never left us. I just made you believe he did." The room tilted. The silence became deafening. Elodie's knees went weak. She sank into the velvet stool, the photo trembling in her hands. All her life, she had believed her father abandoned them, that he disappeared after one fight too many, and her mother raised her alone, strong, angry, unflinching. But that had been a lie, her mother's lie, carefully crafted, repeated, reinforced. The next breath she took felt like glass. She opened the envelope. It was a will, handwritten, recent, her name at the top, everything assigned to her, assets, properties, stocks, even the penthouse, signed by Madeleine, notarized by Jean-Baptiste. And then one final note, tucked behind the signature. "If you've come this far, then you've already made a choice. But there is one more to make. Beneath this letter is another document, unfiled, unsigned. It contains your father's name, his real location, his version of the truth. You can destroy it and no one will ever know, or you can let him tell you who I really was." Her fingers hovered over the second document. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she looked around the room, the velvet curtains, the shelves of untouched books, the scent of perfume that still lingered in the air like her mother's ghost. The woman she had poisoned wasn't just a tyrant or a liar or a socialite clinging to relevance. She had also been afraid. Afraid of a story being rewritten. Afraid of being unloved once the truth was revealed, and Elodie had become her mirror. A daughter who chose silence, who manipulated beauty, who smiled while the poison fizzed. But now the poison had reversed, not in her veins, but in her memory. And she didn't know what to do with it. She sat in that room for a long time, not moving, not crying, just staring at the unopened truth, wondering if knowing it would shatter the last illusion she had left. Or worse, if it wouldn't change anything at all. She opened it. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt like it was shrinking, inward, folding in on itself like burned paper. The second document wasn't legal. It was personal. A letter, typed, printed, signed in ink that had bled slightly at the edges. It was from her father, not a stranger, not a ghost. Not a man who vanished into myth, like Madeleine had led her to believe. He was living in the south of France, quietly, retired, married again, a son, a house by the coast, and he had written to Madeleine 10 years ago, begging her to let him see Elodie, just once. The letter wasn't angry. It was sorrowful, restrained. Every word carried a weight that Madeleine's voice never allowed. He said he understood her pride, her fear, her need to control the story, but that Elodie deserved to know the other half of her history. She kept reading. He spoke of holding her as a baby, of singing to her at night when Madeleine fell asleep early with wine still in her glass, of carrying her through the Luxembourg gardens on his shoulders. He said she looked just like him, but acted just like her mother. He called her his girl, not. Once did he use the word lost, and at the end, there was a line that changed everything. "If she ever asks where I went, tell her I waited." Elodie folded the letter in half with shaking hands. She wanted to scream, or cry, or go back in time and grab herself by the shoulders and scream, "Don't do it." She was lying, all of it. But the worst part wasn't that her mother lied. It was that she believed her, with no questions, no doubt. For years, she had sharpened her hate like a blade, believing herself righteous, justified. She had swallowed poison far longer than her mother ever had, and now it was leaking into everything. What did it mean if Madeleine had tried to protect her from the truth? What did it mean if she failed? What did it mean if Elodie had killed a woman who had, in her own twisted way, still loved her? She walked out of the room and down the hall to her mother's study. The champagne stain was still on the floor. Faint now, a soft amber shadow. She stood over it like a grave. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and whispered something into the quiet. Not forgiveness, not confession, just her name. The name her father had written in the letter, Élodie Madeleine Laurent. Not her mother's. Reflection. Not her father's mistake, her own. And maybe, for the first time in her life, that was enough to break her. She sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, and let the silence press against her like water. There were no more performances left, only choices. And the first was this: whether to let the truth rot in a drawer or let it ruin her and begin again. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark, eyes open, staring at the ceiling above her mother's bed. The sheets still smelled like perfume and old secrets. Every time she blinked, she saw the poison fizzing in the champagne. The way Madeleine's eyes had gone wide, not angry, not afraid, just surprised. As if she'd seen it coming, but still, hadn't believed it would be Élodie. By morning, Paris was drenched in light. Birds sang like nothing had changed, but everything had. She made coffee, black, burnt, swallowed it like medicine. Then she dressed, not in morning clothes, not in black silk, but in her mother's favourite white pantsuit. Pressed, elegant, powerful. She wore no makeup, no jewellery, only the truth folded in her coat pocket. The foundation headquarters was already buzzing when she walked in. Assistants scurried between rooms, legal staff spoke in low tones, and the board members had gathered like vultures, unsure whether to grieve or celebrate. They paused when she entered. She didn't acknowledge them. She went straight to her mother's office. Her office now, sat in the chair behind the desk. Felt the leather tighten beneath her like a held breath. One of the board members knocked, cautiously. "Madame Laurent, there's a press request." The title hit her like static. From who? Le Monde, and a few international outlets. They want your statement. About the will, the foundation, your mother's legacy. Legacy. That word again. Élodie looked down at the document in her pocket. The original will, the letter, the photo, the truth. "I'll prepare something," she said. He nodded. They'd like it by this evening. He closed the door behind him. She stared at the empty room, the view of the Seine, the framed photographs, the shelves of untouched books. This had been Madeleine's throne. Now it was hers. She took out the folder, spread the papers across the desk, looked at the smiling man in the photo. Her father. The little girl in his arms. Herself. Before the war began. She looked at her mother's final note. Burn it, or sign it. She reached for a lighter, paused. The flame hovered above the edge of the paper. Just one flick. 1 second. The truth could be gone forever. No scandal, no press, no headlines, just the illusion of grace, inherited. But then she heard her father's voice in her mind again. "If she ever asks where I went, tell her I waited." He had waited. And Élodie had killed the only woman who could have answered the rest. That was her truth now. Not one she could bury, not one she could escape, only one she could hold. She blew out the flame, folded the documents back into the envelope, and picked up her mother's Mont Blanc pen. She would not burn the truth. She would sign it, all of it, and then, when the press called, she would answer. Not with excuses, not with grief, but with clarity, with confession, and let the world decide what kind of woman she had become. The press arrived in the late morning. Cameras clicked, flashes stuttered, microphones jutted into the office like skeletal fingers reaching for confession. Élodie walked through the crowd without a word. Her eyes were steady, unwavering, calm, like a storm held in a glass vase. The reporters shouted questions, names, accusations. What happened to Madeleine Laurent? Are you her heir? Was there foul play? She did not flinch. She did not smile. She did not cry. In the boardroom, she spread the documents, the original will, the letter, the photo, across the polished oak table. Legal aides whispered, photographers leaned closer. Every eye was on her, hungry for narrative, for scandal, for a villain or a victim. She picked up the Mont Blanc pen, the weight of it familiar now, almost comforting. She signed the documents one by one, not as a declaration of innocence, not as a plea for absolution, but as a record of truth, unfiltered. When she finished, she folded the papers carefully and stood. "This," she said, voice steady and cold as marble, "is everything. The estate, the foundation, the story my mother left me. Nothing more, nothing less. I will answer questions, but first know this. The woman you mourned was formidable, flawed, and human, and so am I." The room was silent. The cameras still flashed, but for the first time, no one knew what to expect. Later, alone, she walked through the penthouse. The walls still carried the perfume of her mother, the faint scent of champagne and velvet, the ghosts of laughter now, hollow echoes. She touched the surfaces lightly, as if testing their memory of Madeleine's presence. She opened the dressing room safe again. The second document, the one revealing her father's truth, lay beneath the letter. She had read it, but now she held it like a mirror, reflecting the daughter she had been and the woman she had become. She could destroy it. No one would ever know. She could live in the illusion of control, the curated power her mother had passed to her, or she could let it out. Let it breathe. Let it fracture the carefully constructed world around her. Elodie folded it back into the envelope and tucked it into her coat. She would deliver it to her father, yes, but she would not run. Not anymore. Running had brought her here. Standing and facing the aftermath was the only choice left. Months passed. The press covered the foundation with fascination. Questions arose, rumors spread. But the truth, wrapped in careful narrative, was shielded by Elodie's quiet command. She moved with precision through board meetings, charity events, and gallery openings, each step deliberate, controlled, like a dance her mother had taught her. And at night, when the city outside blinked in gold light, she would return to the penthouse, sit by the window, look at the Seine, think of the woman she had killed, the mother she had lost, the father she had discovered. She did not smile. Not yet. But she did not regret it. The poison had been her choice. The silence had been her choice. The inheritance, the power, the truth, they were hers, but they came at a price only she understood.